that's amazing is Harasikit's going to have a strategic planning session. Everyone who does not know what Harasikit is, raise your hand. Oh, so there are a few people who don't know about Harasikit. Yeah, Steve, we can always hear you. No? Another time? Oh, Harasikit is a wonderful effort to connect kids in Fairfax with internships and mentors to help them grow together. All right, now, she really is the woman who needs no introduction, and I know you are all wondering why I'm up here, but I am so pleased to introduce Marjorie, not in the role we know of her as a very deeply spiritual person, but in the role of a very deeply knowledgeable person about all things personal finance. She has won awards. She's been in 2 leading financial services companies, and she's been published by the New York Times and was named one of the best financial advisors on every list that Washingtonian has published, beginning with the first in 1984 and ending in 2018. Yes, you were 14. It was an amazing journey. 94. But the important thing is that Marjorie has taken that really invaluable experience and has pulled it all together and has really written a textbook about all the things we need to know as we prepare for whatever is the next chapter of our lives. Several years ago, Jack and I attended one of her seminars in which she told us that people, primarily women, could draw on the Social Security of their spouses without taking their own earlier than they would like. Jack had me signed up the day I turned 62 or whatever that magic number was, and I've never told Marjorie how much money we made as a result of that advice, but we have certainly blessed her name more than once, and I am so looking forward to hearing what she has to tell us today, and I'm sure you are too, so I'll sit down.
I hate to tell Sharon and Jack, but that rule doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, we don't care. We don't care.
I want to say hello and tell me if this doesn't work, because I really don't have a voice. So, is it okay? All right. I want to say hello to those that are out there streaming, but I have to say how wonderful it is to be face-to-face in person with all of you today. Over the last 9 months, I've done many events, but they were webinars and podcasts, and I had a camera looking at, and I had these speakers, and I saw a little photo of the host on the screen, which I split because I was on part of the screen. It was no fun. It really wasn't. So I embrace all of you, and thank you very much for being here. Hopefully you all have a table of contents. Do you? A handout? And what Eleanor Blaney, my co-author, and I did intentionally is to make it the table of contents as detailed as we possibly could. Because what we wanted, and we didn't say this often enough in the introduction, what we really wanted is for folks, prospective readers, to take a look at the table of contents and decide what resonated with them, what was relevant, and to read those chapters and maybe skim or maybe just skip the rest. I mean, for example, those of us here who've already have our Medicare benefits and we've claimed Social Security, you don't need chapters 5 and 6. So I would encourage you, if you're inclined to read more, to see what sings your song. What I'm going to do in the next 50 minutes, and I'm starting with this just to warm up. I'm going to put it down and just fly in a minute. But what I'm going to do is start with some background, as Katie said this morning, a little bit about the why and what of the book. And then I'm going to spend, well, stepping back, Eleanor and I think that there's a fair amount of unconventional wisdom in the book. We also share a lot of conventional wisdom, but with 5 chapters, 5 topics in particular, we think that there's some unconventional wisdom there. And so what I'm going to do is focus on those topics, beginning with transitions, when life happens, chapter 2. And after that, not enough and never enough. Many of us feel like bag ladies or bag gentlemen thing where, we don't have enough. We've got to have more, or we're going to run out of money. We've got to have more. I want to talk a bit about that. The third chapter topic is annuities. Okay, that's what fee-only advisors have until recently thought about annuities, particularly the variable variety. And Eleanor and I, on the process of writing this, of researching this, really changed our minds about annuities. So I'm not hoping to change yours, I'm just hoping to give you a different perspective. And then number 4 is creating a retirement paycheck. And number 5 is housing wealth. How we can use the $11 trillion that those over 62 have in terms of housing wealth. Not necessarily, but it can be a great source of cash. Then I'm going to end on the conclusion, which is about time, our God-given time, how we use it in retirement, maybe differently than we've used it all along. So what I'm going to do is stop midway, give you a break, see if there's a question or two, and if I don't answer your question, there'll be, I think, time at the end for questions. If they're not, I will be around until they lock the doors on me to answer any that you have. So here goes, some background. In several respects, Women-Wise and all of the things we've done since its publication is a continuation of my Real World, Real Faith talk that I gave back in April of 2019. For one thing, my co-author, Eleanor Blaney, was here, and I had the pleasure of introducing her and also introducing the vision that we have had for this book. The other thing is that my faith journey didn't stop in 2019. You'll be glad to know that. And so, and it's continued, as it did in the 70-plus years before, with a few ebbs, but lots of flows. More flows as I get older than the ebbs. But there's some ebbs, and I don't know if any of you know anything about ebbs, but yeah, there are a few ebbs. So it feels like, to me, like a continuation. And I'm going to put this down in a minute, but why did we write this book? That's important. Eleanor, back in about 4 years ago, had a need as well as a vision. The need. We had both retired, each having spent 30 years plus in financial services, specifically fee-only financial planning and investment management. And when you retire, you don't have clients anymore. I learned that. It took me a while, but I learned that. And what that means is that as we had gained wisdom, maybe a bit, and experience and expertise along the way, suddenly we were talking to each other because we didn't have any clients. And so we felt it really important that we were given these gifts by God, and we'd had the privilege of sharing them with clients over the years, but that wasn't going to happen anymore, and we wanted to share that as best we could. Hence came Women-Wise. Excuse me. I've done that part. Through all the decades, we experienced, and there's been at least, 70? I don't know how you count decades, but we're in our 70s, and so that's a lot of time. And we experienced both personally and professionally the challenges that women, especially single senior women, whether never married or divorced like Eleanor or widowed like I am, the challenges that we faced along the way. And what we're hoping is that many women, readers of the book or listeners to today, find some wisdom there, whether you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, or beyond. Eleanor was already a published author. She published Women-Wise in 2010. I was acknowledged for, I don't know what, some contribution, maybe a wise remark I made at some point. But anyway, we've known each other for a very long time. We met in the 80s. Our competing firms were across the sidewalk from each other in Falls Church. And over the decades, we've come to know each other and respect each other. So it kind of made sense that we would come together to do the book. We began the project, we call it the project, in 2018. And Eleanor had retired. I retired at the end of the year. She had started researching, interviewing, and a bit of writing, but I had things I had to do before I could fully engage in 2019. I needed to retire from the firm I'd founded, make sure that the clients were in great hands with the successors, my partners and associates, and also and some of you know what this is like, decluttering. David and I had lived in the home in Great Falls for, well, it's now been for 45 years, but at his passing it had been 30-something. And we had my mother's stuff, my father's stuff, his mother's stuff, his father's stuff, and he was no longer there to go through the stuff. So it was the biggest project I've ever undergone. And people wonder in Hemingway Cluster why I don't park in my garage. Well, guess what's in the garage? So I keep going back to the beginning. I don't want to do that. So Eleanor and I complimented each other. She wanted to write certain chapters, and I wanted to write others. And it turned out to be like pieces of a puzzle. It just all kind of fit perfectly. So over 3 years, the pandemic kept us busy. Over 3 years, we wrote, we rewrote, we edited, we re-edited almost every word that we started off writing. And for the last 9-10 months, we've been promoting the book because, as I learned a lot in this process, is a book doesn't promote itself unless you're Stephen King. And so it's been a journey. So what challenges do women, especially single senior women, and it's true of single senior guys. It's true of couples. But our publisher said you've got to have a hook. You can't say here's advice for everybody and expect to sell anything. But we believe in our hearts too, and that was the important thing. Our passion was to share our wisdom with those who were like us. So some of the challenges that Eleanor and I, and maybe some of you have faced, but as a group, as a demographic, women tend to work fewer years in the workforce because of caring for children, caring for parents, caring for other relatives, caring for friends. They also tend to earn less over the course of their careers. In part, that can be because they choose certain jobs. In part, it can be, sadly, because even today, and the Wall Street Journal recently reported, women in the same job as men earn less. Very sad fact. Getting better, but a very sad fact. Also, we tend to live longer as singles. And that's for a couple of reasons. We tend to marry older spouses. David was 5 years older than I. We also tend to live 2.5 years on average. These are big generalities, but on average, we tend to live 2.5 years longer than men. So doing the math, we tend to be singles for 7.5 years, give or take. And that just means supporting ourselves in all the different ways we have to support ourselves. Also, studies have said that women tend to have less financial literacy. Another study with a tongue-in-cheek said, well, it's really not less financial literacy, it's that men are more confident in their literacy than women are. So I'm sure there's truth to both. But kind of as a result of that, particularly the longer lives as singles and the maybe lacking in literacy, women sadly tend to be, I'm always saying tend to be because this is what somebody's research says or on average, but tend to be more subject to financial abuse, to other kinds of abuse, to scamming and phishing. They're just more vulnerable. And if you want to know more, AARP is a great source of, sadly, of all the scams, but also some wisdom about how we can contend with all that. So, here goes. The five topics I want to talk about. And we really believe, and you can tell me after the fact if this is the case, but we really think there's some conventional wisdom in all five. There's conventional but unconventional wisdom. And so I'm going to talk about the unconventional wisdom that we intended to put out there on 5 different topics, starting with transitions or when life happens. Next, not enough, never enough, the spending plan. Next, annuities. 4th would be creating a retirement paycheck. And the 5th is housing wealth. Transitions, when life happens. I'm going to have to do this occasionally, or otherwise I'm going to dry up. When life happens. Life happens from the time we're born. And much of it's really happy stuff. We're born, we grow up, we graduate, maybe get married, get great jobs, or maybe not. but have children, all kinds of wonderful things, enjoy our siblings. My mother had one of those sad things happen very young. She lost her only sibling. My uncle, her brother Bill, as a Navy pilot flying a cleanup mission over Japan in the waning days of World War II. And I never knew what was wrong, but things, I grew up in a shadow of some sort, and I know my mother never really got over that. And hopefully that doesn't happen, well, it does to other people, but it's a lot of joy as we're growing up, but a lot of frustration. Like some of us get bullied, things that we'd rather not have. But as we age, more things seem to happen. A lot of them are joyful. For Eleanor and me, retirement was both a good thing and a sad thing. Lost our colleagues and our identity and our structure, a few things like that. Moving, relocating for health or other reasons. Loss of a spouse, a sibling, a child. My mother's life was full of losses. She lost my father, and then her second husband, and she lost both my sister and my brother. Sister to cancer, brother to mental illness. And she did what, she grieved, of course, grieved and then grieved and then grieved. And life doesn't happen, it's like you go through a transition, everything's fine, and then you go through another one. No, there can be overlap, and there was some from my mother. But the conventional wisdom is, of course you'll grieve, but then you'll move on, one way or another, and you do move on. And I watched my mother move on, and that's a good thing, because there is life after. But I saw her struggle, and serendipitously, in 2001, I was at a conference and met up with someone by the name of Susan Bradley, who had just written Sudden Money and published it in '01. And it was about those, I'm going to go over time, I can tell already, I really, so. Anyway, she had interviewed and studied those who had windfalls, either won the lottery, which isn't very frequent, or inherited money, and it changed their lives, sometimes not for the best. And so she became a student of transitions and has continued. If you look at her website, susanbradley.com, you can see more about her work and her workshops. I don't believe she's written another book, but she was a major contributor to this chapter that we wrote on transitions. And if you look at the back of, not quite the back, you'll see something called transitions, 4 phases, anticipation, ending, passages, and new normal. And I had followed her, known her for a number of years before things started happening in my life. And I found this to be extremely helpful, not that you don't grieve, but I think it's really helpful to know that you don't move from anticipation to new normal. In my own situation, David, as some of you know, fell down a flight of stairs at home early morning of September 1 of 2016. He was on his way to France. He fell down, went through the landing into the drywall, had terrible brain injuries, and Aaron and Sharon were there almost immediately, and had brain surgery, but never showed any signs of recovery. So after 15 days, I withdrew the hydration, the nutrition, and the artificial, I was going to say respiration. But it was not like I, said, okay, this is terrible, it's tragic. Who am I going to be going forward? You just don't do that. You don't do that. You grieve, as you know, you grieve. And there are things you have to do almost immediately. Write the obituary, plan the memorial service, taxes, on and on and on. And then you begin to, in this ending phase, think about, okay, who am I? Through the fog, who am I going to be? I'm not married anymore. I don't have a spouse anymore. I'm a widow. I was going to work to 75 with my firm. All of a sudden, that did not seem really possible. We were going together, going to rebuild the Great Falls house and hope it was a multi-generational, just all those dreams that sometimes you have. Now that's not going to happen either. I don't need that house. And so as you move from ending into passages, you are beginning to figure out through the fog and the chaos and with glimmers of hope who you're going to be going forward. Who am I going to be? Well, for a time, I'm going to be a retiree because I did retire in 2018. And I'm no longer a resident of Great Falls with neighbors I'd had for more than 40 years. I was going to be a new resident in Reston of this lovely Hemingway cluster where I have some of my best friends. Not as best friends as you are, Denise. I want you to know that. It takes decades. But I love where I live. And so gradually, I began to think ahead. Not that I didn't look back almost every day and cry. I will not cry today. But I began to think of myself as a single. I began to think of myself as a writer. I will forever be a church lady. So moving out of passages very slowly through all these transitions, not just Dave's death, the retirement, the sale of the house. And then, I woke up in January of 2020 and said, wow, I'm in a new normal. No, wrong. I mean, the pandemic hit us all. What's interesting, if you look, it's on her website, Susan does a wonderful job of the pandemic with these 4 stages of transition. I think we'd all agree that we're probably, if not in the new normal, we're awfully close. We've gone through a lot of passage along the way. So the conventional wisdom, you'll move on. Well, you do. But I think Susan Bradley, and we talk more in chapter 2, does a wonderful job of giving us a roadmap. What we're going to go through. It's a process. Again, you don't jump from anticipation to new normal. So I would commend that chapter to you because it does a better job than I'm doing right now. So on from transition is enough. Never enough. I mean, when you approach retirement, if you haven't asked it before, which you should, how much do I need? What would I like to spend? And then there are other questions I'm going to talk about in a minute. Well, I may like to spend this, but I may not be able to. And whatever I'm going to spend, how do I create the paycheck from all these resources that I may have? So not enough, never enough, conventional wisdom. And I won't use the word budgeting. Everyone hates that word. I'll use spending plan. You figure out your spending plan, but the conventional wisdom is you top down it. Rule of thumb, I'll need 80% of what I needed pre-retirement. Well, yeah, I mean, you can see why that came about because you're no longer paying payroll taxes, you're not contributing 401ks, but that's not the way to do it. The unconventional wisdom, and my co-author wrote a workbook in 2014 with some guidance, but you take a blank piece of paper and you start from scratch. You start with line item after line item after line item after line item, and you segregate. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but you segregate the essentials, the non-discretionaries from the discretionaries, the things where if you had to, you would tighten your belt if you could, and most of us can. So think, if you're not already doing it, and I'll guess that this audience, we have some who've done it just that way, but bottom up. I'll tell a story on myself, because I take my own advice, except this one. No, I promised when I retired that I was just going to let loose for the first 5 years. I mean, I worked so hard, as we've all worked so hard through the decades, that I was just going to just do what I wanted to do. But at the end of 5 years, and guess which year is the 5th year? 20, 21, 22, 23. So my project in the 4th quarter is to do just that. I can't tell you that I've done it yet. I've had a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And I hope to continue to have a lot of fun. But the bottom up was the way to go. Now, a colleague of mine, Dan DeVoe, really added a nice kind of asterisk to this, bottom upping. And he calls it the loves. We tend to spend money on the things we love, right? Love of family, children, grandchildren, love of home, maybe renovating, maybe even upscaling, upsizing in retirement. Ka-ching, ka-ching. And then there's love of possibility. And I have a personal illustration of that. Erin knows that one. So I'm going to admit, I'm going to confess, when the pandemic hit with Doug and family on the West Coast, and I'm on the East Coast, and none of us wanted to fly, but all of us were desperate to see each other. I was missing out on my granddaughters growing up. So what did we do? It's not a test. We bought an RV. We bought a 31-footer. Doug, with his 6-year-old and 3-month-old, drove it with his wife, Kara, across the country. They actually went over Colorado. Imagine. in a 31-foot RV. And he's the only driver. In any event, they stopped at national parks. They stopped and saw friends and family, and eventually made it here. And since Doug grew up here, he wanted to spend a few weeks. And then I joined the band with an intention that I'd go all the way back to California and fly back, do that one flight. I mean, 31 feet is like this long. And a 3-month-old. So, I know. So I was the one. I wasn't driving, so I was expendable. And so I flew back from, I didn't make it very far. I flew back from Nashville. But I think Doug's listening, and so I'm going to hear about this. But anyway, this was not, in hindsight, I'm glad we did it. But was this a really great use of a lot of money? Have we used it since? Well, he and his family have used it some. I haven't been in it since. Never want to go in it again since 2020. It wasn't a good use of money, practically speaking. It was that love of possibility. So watch out for the loves in your life, because they can blow a budget or blow a spending plan. All right, I've lectured enough. I'm going to move on first to a couple of questions, because I don't want to wait till the end. If anyone has a question, please ask. And I will take some questions at the end. Does anyone have a question?
Sorry, I have 2 questions on the live stream.
The mic?
On the live stream.
You know, my ears are plugged, so what?
Live stream. Go back here.
2 questions.
Online. Yeah.
What?
People who are watching you have questions.
Oh, how
From
do
the
I?
live stream, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. First question, they wanted to know if they could get a copy of the handout.
If you'll email me,
Okay.
I'll send it. I'll send a PDF.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I really didn't know what you were saying.
Yeah. The second question was where can they buy the book if they're interested?
Never thought you'd ask that. What a great question, and I can answer it. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and our publisher, Amplify Publishing Group's website. But Amazon, I hate to support it, but it's very quick, and you get it quickly. And they discounted it. What?
You can buy a Kindle edition.
You could, thank you. Thank you very much, Corinne. Yes, you can buy a Kindle. I'm glad you asked, whoever asked out there.
If they're going to email you, should you say your email address?
Just remember, I can't hear.
Okay. What's your email address?
Oh, it's in the directory. I don't know where mine is either. It's Marjorie Fox, MarjorieFox, 1968 @gmail.com. Thanks for the softballs, Dave. The other questions I don't need to answer right now. So let me go on with the third topic, third chapter. And there's a bit of a segue. You should have at the very back of your handout something, where the wherewithal. My grandfather always used that term, so it's such a quick term, wherewithal. But in any event, where do the resources come from to bring to bear on whatever the spending is that you'd like to do, and hopefully have proven to yourself you're going to be able to do. And there are models, there are all kinds of ways out there. You can do it yourself if you have an advisor. I'm sure you've already asked and answered that question. But let me, so everyone have it? Please. I had this problem with the hymnal this morning. So, resources. And there's one block missing, and that's cash. So when I up this, I'm going to put cash. And I'm thinking in terms of 4 types of expenditures, and you probably do too. But for me, it was renovating the townhome after I bought it. And I reserved cash to do that. That was kind of the one-time expenditure that I had the time and bandwidth to actually undertake as soon as I retired. There's travel, there are lots of other things. But then the second, as we mentioned, is the essentials, the non-discretionaries, the things that, without which, life is hard. And we show here two things I mentioned earlier, but that's all I'm going to do: Medicare and Social Security, and their pensions. But there aren't as many pensions out there anymore as there used to be. And the way I think of these, and I've got to figure out a way to display them, but these are all ways to meet those essential expenses because they're predictable, if not guaranteed. And if it's essential, you want predictable income to meet them, if at all possible, if at all possible. And I did put pension in here, but but there certainly are still pensions out there with the federal government and state and local and the like. So this I would say is the non-discretionary. And then you get to the portfolio, and we all have one, big or small. And Eleanor and I think that a portfolio, assets to the extent you have them, are a great way to meet the non-essentials, the discretionary expenses, because, well, after a bad year, when, let's see, 2022, we don't have as much portfolio, most of us, as we started with. But if you can cut back a bit and look to a diminished portfolio and not have to sell stocks, I mean, and in 2022, selling stocks or bonds, almost anything, you were selling lower. So Aaron's yawning.
Sorry. I got up really early this morning. It's not you, I promise.
You should see him in the endowment meetings when we talk about it. Sorry. But I mean, last year, almost everything lost money. And I don't even need to read this, but these were all the major asset classes. All negative. Now, what wasn't negative? If you'd had the foresight to put it all on the country of Turkey, up 100%. On the graph, and I didn't bring it, but it's kind of like everyone else is down, and there's Turkey. Or if you put it on commodities, because commodities, oil, gas, copper, cotton, etc., were up 16% as a basket last year, 16. Now, the problem with commodities is over the last decade, commodities have earned you a negative 1% annualized total return. So every year for the last decade, somebody owning commodities has lost at least 1%, depending upon the mix. So back to the wisdom for portfolio withdrawals now. You know what I did? I skipped into it, but that's okay. I really didn't want to talk about them anyway. And I'll make a mention at the end. But what you really don't want to have to do is sell low to meet a cash need in retirement. I mean, that's just because if you sell and you spend those dollars, they're never going to be in the portfolio. I know I'm preaching to the choir. They're never going to be there to recover, to rebound. One of the, let's say, conventional wisdoms, there's something called the total return strategy that I think most of us have used during our working years. We're saving, we're investing, we use the savings to rebalance, I mean, you all know that, the portfolio that we have. You buy the things that have underperformed. They're not bad investments, they just had a bad spell of returns. And it works, total return strategies work really well if you're not retired. They really do. Many advisors and many folks continue with that strategy in retirement. The problem is that when you're withdrawing, not accumulating, it's a whole different thing, because you're not rebalancing in the way I've described. What you're doing is looking at your portfolio and saying, where can I get the cash that I need to spend in 2023? Now you can maintain a boatload of cash, but there's an opportunity, particularly in good markets for stocks and bonds, but for owning a boatload of cash. You don't earn much of anything. And the problem with total return is, and just as recently as 2022, if you don't have the cash for spending, and we're talking about spending beyond the Social Security and the annuities that I haven't talked about, and pensions and the like, you're going to have to sell something low. And that's just what you don't want to do. So there's been a lot of research, and I know some of the folks who are doing it, and what they've come up with first is a tool to tell you what kind of retiree you are. Because there isn't just one way. I mean, total return is one of the ways. There isn't just one way. It all depends on your personality, how much you like safety, how much you like probability, how much you like contractual obligations, how much you like optionality, the ability to change your mind. And it's called RISA, the Retirement Income Style Awareness Tool. It's available through advisors. It may soon be available. I can't speak to consumers, but it's a questionnaire, and you answer the questions, and their PhDs and all that study have decided how the answers to those questions really dictate or determine the kind of style that best fits you when you're in retirement. Now, the style that best fits me is the same one that we use for the endowment here at Immanuel. Oh, what? Is it off? No. I'm hitting it. Okay. All right, I'll be good. Okay, so it's called time segmentation, and you may have heard of bucket strategies, which is a fine strategy in and of itself. It's really, I mean, there's a cash bucket where you spend from, a bond bucket where you replenish the cash bucket, and a stock bucket where you replenish the bond bucket, which you then can replenish the cash bucket. The problem is, when do you sell? When do you replenish? There's more to that than that. And we write about a strategy in Chapter 9. The company is asset dedication. I used it first more than a decade ago with my sister's estate, and then brought it to Immanuel and the endowment in it'll be 10 years next year, and then I personally use it myself. But I'm going to just paint a very short picture. I promise, Erin, it's going to be very brief, okay, about the strategy. And that is, it is like a bucket strategy. You collect cash because you have a bond ladder, and bonds or bond ETFs maturing each year, maybe out 7, 8, or 9 years, and that the bond mature with proceeds and coupons in a way that presents you with what you want to spend in 2023. It's like, voila. And in the case of the endowment, we just saw that happen again for like the 9th or 10th time now, where bond ETFs, and that's, you know what ETFs are, bond ETFs matured, presenting us with proceeds, collecting coupons from the rest of the bonds along the ladder, and here it is, the cash we need to make grants in 2023. We don't have to sell stocks. We don't have to sell the bonds because they're designed to mature. And I think most of you know that you can get in trouble with bond funds because as the interest rates go up and down, the value of the securities in the bond fund go up and down. If you hold on to a bond until it matures, assuming it doesn't default, you're going to get the bond proceeds, the maturity value. So you don't need to worry about the ups and downs along the way. It's worked. Some of the members of the committee are here, and I want you to nod. It has worked, Jim. It has worked. It has worked well for most of the last decade. Taking the pressure off the stocks that are at the far end after the bond ladder, letting them recover, and stocks always recover eventually, so that we don't have to sell anything low. And it's created, I won't speak for anyone else on the endowment committee, but it's given me great peace of mind in these turbulent times. So conventional wisdom, just continue what you were doing pre-retirement, total returned. Unconventional wisdom, if it fits your style, then take a look at this time segmentation strategy. It's in chapter 9 of the book, and it's all out there. It's not a secret, but it isn't yet quite conventional wisdom. All right, still skipping annuities. I really like annuities, so I'm going to skip them and go on to the 5th topic with a bit of unconventional wisdom. Housing wealth. And we've talked about having cash for those expenditures you anticipate, like renovations after you retire. We've talked about the guaranteed streams of income, predictable income, whether it's Social Security, pensions. I mean, Medicare offsets health expenses, so I count that too, and annuities if you should decide to go there. We've talked about the portfolio as a way to address the, let's say, discretionary expenses, where you can cut back a bit if you need to. But if you're presented with the cash, you may not have to. What about those things, those sudden events that happen along the way on your retirement journey? What if, it could be a health event. It could be a decision to take that round-the-world trip. It could be to buy an RV. I don't recommend it, but it could be to buy an RV. It could be to put a deposit down on a retirement community. Those kind of things may not be in your budget or your spending plan. Where do you go? Well, you can't have a boatload of cash, but Eleanor and I become fans of, it's like I have to take a deep breath. Reverse mortgages. It's like, reverse mortgages. Yes, they're much better than they were when they first came on the market in 1988. There's a lot of misinformation still out there, the conventional wisdom that, oh my goodness, I'm a homeowner. I'll lose title to my house. I'll lose my house. They're expensive, they are, no denying. Or the children say, whoa, wait a minute, my inheritance, if you mortgage the house, there it goes. What's a reverse mortgage? It's a reverse of a traditional or conventional mortgage, where with a conventional, as we all know, we've all had them, we get a lump sum to pay off the seller, and then we pay it back in principal and interest payments over time. A reverse is really the reverse, exactly the opposite, in that you may be able to tap the equity, and I'll talk about briefly 4 ways, but you don't have to pay back anything, no principal, no interest, until the home is sold. The home must be sold when you pass on, when you move out of your principal residence. Lots of rules and regulations, but that can be a very long time. 4 uses. Think of, and you don't want to do this, some people have been foolish, about reverse mortgage, taking a lump sum that you can take, and then just spending it, and being left with very little equity in their home. Not wise. But if you need a supplemental stream of income, after you've either done or not done the annuity, you've taken account of Social Security, you've applied that pension, you can take a stream of income from your housing wealth, a supplemental source of income. Secondly, you can pay off your traditional mortgage so that you no longer have principal and interest payments to make. It helps your cash flow. Principal and interest accrue, there's no free lunch, but you can essentially do away with the debt servicing of your traditional mortgage. You can actually buy a home with it. Now, you need more resources than that, but the most frequent use of it is one I'm making, which is a line of credit. I think most of us have had a home equity line of credit through our careers of owning homes that take out $100,000 beyond the mortgage. It's there. If you need it, you can draw on it. Problem with HELOCs is that, 1, you have to renew them after 10 years, and 2, as clients of mine found, that if you don't have earned income anymore, you can't renew them. Your underwriters want to see your earned income. They don't care about your assets. I'm exaggerating, but they want to see your earned income. If you don't have it, they won't renew your HELOC. They also can be, let's say, closed, as they were in the housing crisis, 06, 07, 08. Remember those times? My business partner, HELOC, was frozen. Just when it started raining, no umbrella, or whatever, I don't know, it goes, whatever it says. Anyway, it was taken, he was not allowed to draw further from it, and he needed to, and that source he relied on was not there for a period of time, because the whole housing world froze up. Disadvantages, but the HECM, that's a home equity conversion mortgage, which is the government-insured reverse mortgage, the line of credit there, and that's what I have, it doesn't have those disadvantages. Once you have it, you don't have to renew it. It will never be frozen. And again, you don't have to pay on it. As long as you keep up your homeowner's insurance, all those things that you have to keep up, any association fees, property taxes, you got to keep those up, or the lender won't like it. But that's what we all have to do. It's available to you, and it may go away, but the most amazing feature of these HECM lines of credit is the line of credit grows. Have you ever had a HELOC line that grew? No. And this feature may go away, but it grows at the same interest rate as any loan balance. So in my case, it's grown by $100,000 since I took my verse out in 2019. That feature is the one that makes us nervous. I mean, I don't sell reverse mortgages. I just write about them and have one myself. But that just seems like it's too good to be true. Growing line of credit. But from little I've heard, if it does go away, it's not going to be taken away from those who have it. They're going to be grandfathered. So if you're even considering this, you don't need to worry about it. So conventional wisdom is just keep a bucket of cash or a boatload. Or be prepared to sell some of your securities low if something unexpected happens. The unconventional wisdom, and journalists and academics are really getting behind this for the right people, for the right need, for the right use. And not for everybody, but in my case, it's peace of mind, and that's what all of this is about. How can we have peace of mind so we have the energy to serve God out in the world and not to worry about all these various things. So I will say one thing about annuities. It's easy for me to skip over them, but annuities, Conventional wisdom, too expensive. Fee-only advisors never liked them. There's surrender charges and commissions and the like. And they're complicated. Some of them are. Eleanor's and my wisdom, so to speak, is it's again for the right person, somebody who has non-discretionary expenses up here and other sources of income that's only here. I mean, you can get a stream of income from an annuity that bridges the gap. And so it can be very good. I'm talking about streams of income. The variable annuities, and we call it chapter, you notice, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we're talking about a retiree, not everybody. But for a retiree, the good form of annuity is providing a stream of income, either for the rest of your life or to bridge you to Social Security's maximum benefit at age 70. You can do that, a term of years. Stream of income, predictable, guaranteed. The bad, and we had to be kind of cute with this. Remember Clint Eastwood, right? And the ugly? Well, the bad is, we think, is a variable annuity which has stocks, tax-deferred growth and all of that, but there's no guarantee that comes. There are guarantees, but nothing's really predictable about variable annuities. They are great if you're growing your portfolio. If you're pre-retirement, they can be terrific. But for, I think, the typical retiree, you should avoid them. They're very complex. The more guarantees, the more confusing, for me, they get. What's the ugly? The ugly is an annuity that's missold. Annuities are typically sold, not bought. And sometimes they're sold by somebody who certainly would like the compensation, but isn't really putting the client first. Maybe it's just there isn't a need for the annuity. The need is made up. So ugly is mis-selling, and that's true of lots of things. So that's really all I'm going to say about annuities. Yay. So finally, the conclusion, and I want to say a couple of words. It's about time. That's the chapter. And as Eleanor and I discovered immediately following our retirement, we really didn't know what to do with our time. I mean, we were all involved in certain things. But it's like all that time that had gone to the job, and maybe professional associations and things like that. You know, the demands like that aren't there anymore. So we talked fairly whimsically in the conclusion about spending time in retirement, whether we call it time to have fun, time to inspire, time to serve, time to say yes, time to say no. And a colleague of mine, and this is not in your handout, but I think it doesn't need to be if I still have it. Yes. A good friend of mine and colleague in South Carolina. I know you probably can't see this, but what it is are all the ways you can spend your time in retirement. Family, friends, physical, mental, serve, faith, and so on. And then there are numbers 1, 2, and 3 going up. You can create it yourselves. You don't need this. But the things that you're doing or wish to do to meet these goals for spending time. I think it's a wonderful and a simple tool, and I appreciate Bill letting me show it. But time, it's God's gift to us. Our talents, we don't want to stop using them, and our time. We want to continue to serve Immanuel, the local community, and the world. And so thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, questions? Any? No, Steve, not you. Steve. I thought we had microphones, but I'll just come up close. Real close. Hi, Steve.
I'll speak into her mic. I have a faith question, and I'm going to pull forward what you did in real faith a little bit. And it's an excuse to mention Harris Kit because Katie and Billy Klutz led one of our 2 financial forums for Harris Kit. For those of you who raised your hands, it's in the e-presence link to Harris Kit. And that was Billy's comment that Jesus talks about money more than any other subject in the Bible. It's something that I've never forgotten. And it must be true because Billy said it. But how we spend our money and how we spend our time is a reflection of our faith. And I doubt you talk about the baby Jesus in your book, but could you just share a little bit about how your faith has informed some of the things that you said this morning?
Woo!
In 30 seconds or less.
And now we know why you didn't want to call it Steve. This is great.
Whoa. Well, I first want to say it informed our book. Eleanor is different denomination, but it informed the way we thought about some of the topics, and in every sense, we were trying to give something that we had an ability to give to our readers and to our listeners. So that's the book. How it had, now, so would you ask that again? No. How does my faith
inform this book and your views about finance?
Well, how does my faith inform the book? I won't speak for Eleanor. If you read the transitions chapter, number 2, we talk about, and gently, the final transition. You know, we're transitioning as we age. Maybe our health declines, but none of us is getting out of here alive. And so we really intimate about our faith. You know, we have to be careful because we don't want people tossing the book because they think we're preaching, even though we kind of are for a bit. So there's that. There's the time. You know, we mentioned as all of you in this room do, serve Immanuel and the greater world as a way to spend time. I have to say, it really doesn't inform, Steve, our conversation about Social Security or Medicare. or that's the best I can do off the cuff. I'm sure I missed something big, but Vance.
Two questions. Mine are not as spiritual as Steve's. But the one question was about bonds. You mentioned a bond ladder. Are you recommending that we buy a self-sustaining bond, or a bond index fund?
Good question. I'm not recommending that you buy a bond mutual fund, whether it tries to track the Barclays aggregate or something else, because when things happen with interest rates, as they've happened in 2022, and they'll continue to happen, if interest rates go up, the values of those individual bonds in that bond fund decline. That's not predictable. That's not in any kind of a guarantee. So if you want predictable income, because you have predictable expenses, right? You don't want a bond fund, whether it follows an index or it's actively managed. The great thing about a bond ladder, well, two kinds of risk with bonds. A bond can default, as Lehman Brothers did back in 2008, and essentially you won't get either coupon payments or your principal back. You lose. That's default risk, but you also have what's called duration risk. The longer the maturity with the bond, whether it's a treasury, which is very safe from default, or corporate, municipal, the longer it is until you get your money back, think of it that way, then the more volatile when interest rates go up and down, the more impact rising interest rates have on bond values. But if you put together a ladder like asset dedication does for the endowment, then what you have, we use bond ETFs, but you have a collection of bonds in this ETF, all of which matured over the course of 2022, presenting us with cash in 2023 with which to fund grants. We don't worry about what happens. The value of the bond ETF will go up and down over the course of falling and rising interest rates, but we don't care because we're going to wait till this very creditworthy set of bonds mature, pay out their proceeds, and give us predictable cash to fund the grant recipients. I don't know if that helped. It's just a fundamental difference between the two.
Thank you for a very great presentation. My final question is, besides RVs, are boats good investments?
Where do you plan to sail?
They're like RVs, man.
Any other questions? And I'll hang around if you just want to ask me. Mark?
So I'm concerned that over the past 13 years, if not 40 years, the federal government and the Federal Reserve have impacted the price of portfolios in perhaps predictable manner, meaning they only want them to go up. And I'm concerned that my children have seen this as evidence of what the future will bring, and that there may be a time at which the past and the future are going to divert from each other. And I don't know if you have any longer term predictions as to the relationship between what our federal government and Federal Reserve do and how a stock portfolio might perform.
I've got a timer, those of you who know me. There was a lot of manipulation going on, quantitative easing, buying treasuries that went out there because we have enormous debt and sending cash out to the public that they could spend or invest. I mean, the prices of many things went up over that course of that, not just the stock market. Lower interest rates fuel spending. It was interesting, for a while we invested in managed futures, and we had some success, but we started hearing from those who run the managed futures funds that they just couldn't make the money when the Fed was manipulating. All this easy credit, driving down interest rates, was an artificial kind of stimulus, and it made what they tried to do, which I didn't always understand, but tried to do impossible, because the markets were being, I'll use the word, manipulated by the Fed, and government spending, of course, also leads to things. I don't have a better answer, Mark, but when things go up, they go down. So.
Do you think we're ever going to get off this path of?
You're asking the wrong person.
I'm just concerned that everybody's been taught to buy and hold because stocks always come back, and of course, stock indices always come back, but individual stocks don't always come back. And I'm mostly concerned about my children having been taught this idea that you just keep dollar cost averaging your whole life, and at the end of your life, you'll have more money.
I don't know a better way.
So dollar cost averaging is the best way?
Unless you have a crystal ball, and then you'll buy turkey. Sorry, I can't help more. Any other? Well, I want to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Marjorie.